my Twitter has been blowing up with news that Sony's coming out with figures that are Amiibo copycats, as some people have been putting it. This video is going to argue in favor of Sony. Now, I realize as a Nintendo YouTuber, that probably comes off as a little weird to say, but I'm not somebody who just sides with a company for everything. I would never be that person. I'm just a big fan of Nintendo. So, with that being said, let's talk about why I personally think Sony did not copy anyone here. So, like I mentioned before, this news of Sony coming out with their own miniature figures had a lot of people talking. Mostly the Nintendo and Sony fan bases, of course. I don't think Xbox people and PC people really care all that much. But basically, if you follow a lot of big Nintendo publications, like sites like Nintendo Everything, Nintendo Life, they very quickly linked the idea that these new miniature figures are essentially amiibos, but for Sony. Now, let me be clear that I highly disagree with this notion, and I think it's kind of irresponsible for them to make that link, even if they acknowledge that they are not amiibos. I mean, it's obvious. It's not made by Nintendo, so obviously they're not going to be amiibos, but even saying that they're similar, the only thing I can say that really seems similar is their packaging, and that's kind of normal for these miniature figures. I mean, we've had Lego Dimensions, Disney Infinity, and Skylanders before, so I don't think it's even a copy of Nintendo in any way. And there's also two very big differences as to why these figures are just not amiibo copies. And basically, one is that these figures are not made by Sony at all. The figures are pretty much called the Totaku line, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. And this line is basically some other company that Sony licensed their characters to, and characters with a strong PlayStation representation, to basically make minifigures of. That's basically no different than if Nintendo were to license out, say, oh, I don't know, Jack's Pacific to make little tiny Mario figurines, which, by the way, they have if you aren't aware. Would that make them a copy of Disney Infinity, for example? Well, no, it just doesn't really make any sense. It's not made by Nintendo, and these figures are not made by Sony, so that really doesn't make any sense. And I think the next reason is probably the sole biggest reason as to why these figures are not even close to being amiibo copies. These figures do not have NFC chips in any way at all. They don't work with any games. They're literally just miniature figures. That's it. They have no purpose other than being nice little figures for you to collect if you have a strong PlayStation affiliation, like if you're a fan of a lot of their exclusives. And while I can personally say that I'm not exactly the biggest fan of PlayStation's more modern stuff, I did, however, like some of their older stuff. And I don't mean Parappa, I'm talking like Jack and Daxter, for example, or like Sly Cooper. I like those guys. And there's no figures of them yet, so I'm not really interested in the line that they have as of now. But what I can say for a fact is that if you are a fan of Nintendo and you are annoyed of Sony, quote unquote, copying Nintendo again, let's just take a step back and realize that this is not the Wii era again. This is not a situation where Nintendo made bank and Sony's doing the same thing as they are, but trying to improve it in their own way or having their own spin to it and trying to make a quick buck, basically. I could understand the argument with the Wii and then the Move and also including Xbox's Kinect. I can kind of see the argument there. And I believe there was some other stuff in the past that people also accused Sony of copying Nintendo for. But for this specific idea, this has nothing to do with Amiibo. I mean, maybe the company that they licensed to specifically made their packaging look kind of similar, but at the same time, that doesn't really matter, and Sony has no real connection to the two. The most Sony probably said was, hey, Amiibos are working, so let's just license out our characters to make miniature figures, since people seem to be buying those. That's pretty much the most I see in this scenario. But honestly, this is perfectly fine. Uh, I just hope that they make something, make a figure that I would be personally interested in. Maybe Crash, but I've never been too into Crash myself. Not because I don't like him, but I've never grew up with him. But what do you guys think? You let me know, because I saw a lot of people freaking out about this, that, oh, Sony's copying Nintendo again! And it doesn't come off that way to me. I could kind of see the vague resemblance, and that's pretty much it. At the surface level, it may look like they're copying them, but when you actually read into it, no NFC chip and not being made by Sony pretty much tells me that this is the equivalent of just licensing their characters out for just toys, generally. But maybe you guys have a different opinion on that, so just let me know. I'm always reading the comments whenever the hell I get one. And I'll talk to you guys in the next video. Later.